English translation. 238th Contact Part 4. Saturday, 18th May, 1991, 0:55 hours.
Can I now continue with my explanations?
Actually, already, if you do not mind answering a question first.
Our conversation is getting longer and longer, and I am not coming to the end with my explanations.
You can manipulate the time a bit afterwards.
I guess I will have to. There is nothing else I can do.
Well then, please explain how it is exactly with those human beings who have to be regarded as having real contacts with other levels or beings, etc. of non-earthly origin. Of 1 million alleged contact persons, etc., there should only be about 200 who have real contacts. As I have understood the matter, which unfortunately was not equally understood by others, the opinion is that per 1 million human beings who claim to have any contacts or other connections to higher levels and higher spiritual forms, to extraterrestrials, to spiritual leaders, which is horrendous nonsense anyway, etc. Per 1 million such assertions, just 200 can apply all around. But as far as I know, there are just 5 human beings on Earth who might say that they have contacts or any kind of connections that are outside the usual and normal. These, however, remain silent and in no wise enter among the human beings, neither in the small nor in the large. As far as I know, there are about 11,000 human beings around the world who claim to have contacts or other connections in the aforementioned form, which also corresponds in percentage to the 5 human beings who have actual contacts. In my opinion, however, this is probably a calculation that has only been calculated as a percentage from these 11,000 contact claims, so that I cannot help but doubt the result with regard to around 200 human beings per million claims. As I know the consciousness-based level of the evolution of all human beings on the Earth, so that of the pure Earthborn, as well as that of the immigrants from space, the fact arises for me that on the Earth, at the present time, no 20 human beings are able to maintain actual contact connections of the mentioned form, if I disregard those about 30,000 who receive impulses not recognizable for them. So it can never be true that 200 human beings per million claimants would be capable of such contact connections. In my opinion, your calculations in this regard can only be that you have calculated a possibility that would result from 1 million contact claimants, calculated according to the 5 real contact claimants from the mass of about 11,000 contact claimants.
Your thoughts correspond to the correctness, and so also your considerations. That did not seem to be very important to us, so we did not give any further explanations. For us, it seemed self-evident that you would recognize and interpret everything in the true sense of the word, in which we were not mistaken, as you just proved.
Fine, thank you. Of course, it will now be the case when our conversation becomes known that on the one hand all envious ones, know-it-alls, critics and wannabe contactees, liars, swindlers, deceivers, sick ones, lunatics and charlatans, etc. will question everything, and that on the other hand megalomaniacs and incorrigible liars and etc. will claim that they, of all human beings, would belong to the 5 persons who are considered to be actual contactees and other liaisons.
Both will certainly be the case, although it must be said about the 5 true contact persons that they will never, and under no circumstances, ever mention their abilities and contacts in a single word.
I'm aware of that, but many will not like it, which is why they will take our statements as an occasion for new intrigues and slander.
Also to seek your life and the lives of all those who belong to you and to the mission, to harm the body and to destroy everything. The time has come for the first waves of the fulfillment of prophecy, whereby many negative things will happen in the coming time and in the coming years and decades. But the unity and recognition and observance of the truth by all who are connected with it and with the mission will make everyone strong and bring much success in spite of all the fallout. Nobody should despair, for which there is also never a reason, even if much often becomes hard and difficult. You have survived very bad and even evil times during all the years that you have already been assigned to the mission and fulfilled it to the best of your ability. This is a fact that no one can deny, even if often in the very difficult beginnings much failed. Through your wise foresight and admirable steadfastness, and through your unyielding will to fulfill your duties, everything has turned to good account and to success, which we ourselves could only recognize when we took a closer look at many things. From our side, there would hardly be anyone, as well as not with the group members, who would have handled everything so well and perseveringly until everything became a success, as you have done, and
that is where it should stay. Once again, it is enough what you have said. I have done no more and no less than my duty, as have all the others who have always actively helped and worked with us, as well as you who have had so much patience with us. But please do not do that, because there are more important things that we have not discussed yet. For example, you have not yet said anything about the role that Mikhail Gorbachev will play in the new Union, if he is not finally cut off and remains in office. Nor have you made it clear whether another world war is definitely looming or not.
At first, Mikhail Gorbachev will definitely remain in his office, after which he will assume the role of mediator and stabilizer. But only if the situation clears up and an agreement is reached for a central supervisory authority to exercise control over nuclear weapons. In this case, the danger of an imminent new world war is very low. Unfortunately, these things are not yet clear for us, because we have not yet been able to deal with them to such an extent that an absolute clarification would have arisen. In this respect, I cannot give any further explanations because our findings in this regard have not yet progressed further. It is only clear to us what has just been explained to you, which will happen at about the same time, when the volcano Etna will unfold a greater activity on Sicily after a rest of about 2 years, as our volcanologists have fathomed. According to their statements, the new activity of the volcano on the 15th of December should result, whereby this naming of the time should be very exact, as one assured me.
Then there will be no doubt about it. I wanted to ask you something else, but it had slipped my mind again. It is about the multi-duplicators. When Nocademian built up his robot armies and his android armies in his time, he did so in a manner that still seems utopian to today's Earth human. Because he built a multi-duplicator for this purpose, which multiplied everything he programmed with an atomic blueprint, etc., infinitely many times in absolute unison. Thus, Nocademian actually only needed to construct one copy of each type of robot, as well as one copy of the androids, after which he could multiply them in infinite numbers using the multi-duplicator. Even the tiniest atomic detail of the final product resembled the prototype, which served only as a perfect model. In fact, such a multi-duplicator is a giant apparatus that produces clones. In other words, one could also say that it is a copier or duplicator that provides an exact copy of the original, not only the externally visible, but also the interior, down to the last and finest atomic structure. The question is whether you also have such multi-duplicators, which are based on electrons, which are based on their operation with regard to the required energies, but also with regard to the required matter for the multi-duplications to be generated. If I remember correctly, then the unexhaustible cosmic electron seas are tapped in order to transform and form the necessary matter from the electrons, from which then the templates programmed by atomic images receive their material form and are materially duplicated.
This wonderful invention of Nocademian has remained with us. Even if today everything has been changed and renewed to such an extent, precisely in accordance with the inevitable progress that nothing points to its origin. We have been producing all necessary building materials of all kinds, machines, robotic tools, androids, and also medicines and food, etc., in this form for thousands of years by duplicating them.
But you also have gardens, orchards, vegetable gardens, etc., as I know.
Certainly. What we can gain from nature in a natural wise. We work out together with nature in a natural way, but always in such a manner that neither nature nor the planet nor the fauna or flora suffer any damage.
You really breed meat as just the product you need, so you never have to kill an animal life form.
That is correct, but we do not only produce meat from cell tissue by breeding, but also from our multipliers. Other things also belong to it.
Why, is my name not correct?
According to the word value, your name is completely correct.
Well, yes. I suppose you also make all the metals with the multi-duplicators. Because if I remember correctly, Sim Yase told me in 1975 or 1976 that you were extracting the basic materials for metal production from the realms of the planets, etc., in order to convert them, which would result in lead first and then all the pure metals or alloys required. At that time, I did not think about it any further, but in the meantime, the idea came to me that you would get the necessary raw materials for certain metals or alloys directly through the multi-duplicators, in order to process them in cold processes, in order to create special alloys from them. Perhaps, I could imagine, you get the ready-made metals and alloys directly from the multi-duplicators, which duplicate all matter in cold processes according to given atomic image patterns. Of course, a multi-duplicator could also be called a cold processor, even if the human being on the Earth may misinterpret this, because for them, a processor is something else, namely a central part of a data processing system, which contains the arithmetic unit and the control unit. Do you call the apparatus a multi-cold duplicator in your own language?
The meaning of your word roughly corresponds to our name. In any case, everyone here would understand the meaning of your newly created term.
Well, that is fine, but I still have the question as to what your combinations, probability calculations, regarding Mikhail Gorbachev will actually continue to be, because I assume that he will not be able to play the role of stabilizer and mediator for a long time. As I estimate Boris Yeltsin, he will not like the role of Gorbachev, whereby he will try to throw Gorby out of the saddle and out of his post with all the power at his disposal, and with a lot of trickery and malice, with deceitfulness and intrigues and other nasty things, if he has to give up his office in the end.
These are also our fears, unfortunately. Even though we do not yet have any firm predictions about this, the combination's probability calculations suggest that everything will happen as you just said. Of course, there may still be circumstances that are unknown to us so far, and that make everything appear in a different light, whereby everything can still change to Gorbachev's and the Union's advantage, but our findings so far point to other values.
And of course, no cock will crow because of Yeltsin's lousy and power-hungry machinations, because then the majority of all those screaming hooray will be in bondage to him. Thus, Yeltsin's power-hungry intrigue is also not recognized.
When everything is actually fulfilled according to our present knowledge, then your words will become reality.
The final end for the existence of the Soviet Union will then probably also take place, right?
That will be so, yes. Many other things will happen around the same time, but they will also happen in other parts of the world. In Japan, for example, the Sakurajima volcano will erupt on the island of Kyushu in the early morning hours of the 16th of December. At about the same time, only about 24 hours earlier, one of our predictions is that in the Red Sea a pilgrim ship, passengers and pilgrims returning from annual pilgrimage to Mecca, called Salem Express, will run aground on a reef near Port Safaga and sink in minutes, causing about 410 lives to be lost. Furthermore, around that time, it also turns out that the Zionists will again make propaganda lies for pro-Zionism and pro-Israel. Not least, our conversation will contribute to this with regard to the truth of the Jews really murdered in the Second World War by the Nazis. Because through our conversation and through the contact reports as well as through other sources of truth, the actual number of murdered Jews threatens to become known worldwide, the Zionists will attack and claim that the number of murdered Jews is still much higher than originally assumed. In this kind of lying form, they will act because they want to promote and stir up again the feelings of guilt and responsibility of the Germans and all the rest of the world, to trivialize the Israelite crimes concerning murder, war crimes, and terror practiced by Mossad, and to heal pity from the ignorant and misguided.
I can imagine that the truth will be challenged. It would be a miracle if that were not the case. The same will probably apply to the facts about the fake moon landing of the Americans and the events around Pearl Harbor. In these matters of denial, all like-minded human beings in the world are on a par, just as much as lies and deception. But while we are at it, when should the next Middle East peace conference take place? And where? After the failure of the first, there should be a continuation, as you said.
With great certainty, the next date will be December 4th of this year, in Washington, in the USA. According to our forecast, the Israelis will play out all their arrogance and will not come to the meeting to humiliate the Arabs and get them into a rage. But nothing else is to be expected.
During your speech, I quickly made a few combinations and worked through a small calculation in relation to the things you said about Mikhail Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, the new Minsk Union, and other things. In my opinion, and according to my calculations, the actual Soviet Union should finally cease to exist around the turn of the year 1991-92. This means that it would have to be finally dissolved at this time if my combination and calculation were not flawed.
This combines with our own calculations. But time will prove whether our and your calculations and combinations will be correct. The new union will probably have a different name than you say, because the new name will probably be Union of Sovereign States, or similar. It is to be feared, however, that Boris Yeltsin will not be satisfied with his increased power up to then, because his ambition lies in the sole power over all Union states. If his aspirations are fulfilled, the world is in real danger again, for Boris Yeltsin could be worse than Nicolae Ceausescu, for if Mikhail Gorbachev is forced to resign by Yeltsin, then this means that the new ruler of Russia, Yeltsin, will have the supreme power over nuclear weapons, of which around 30,000 warheads strong are stored in 3 Union states.
This would mean that the madman could press the red button at any time as he wished, even if the other 2 states of the Union besides Russia did not agree, right? Russia itself has a respectable stockpile of nuclear weapons that would be enough to destroy the world.
Unfortunately, this is the truth, which is why we hope that many things will still turn out for the better, which we have unfortunately not yet fathomed, as I already explained to you. However, and this is certain, Boris Yeltsin has a tendency to want dictatorial power.
I can imagine that. Only with the Union of Sovereign States can I not begin much. If the current Union states are to be sovereign, then how can they still belong to a union, since sovereignty in this case means sovereignty and independence?
That in and of itself is correct, but the Earth human knows how to mix things and concepts in such a manner that something different arises from it than the things and concepts actually state. On the other hand, I also told you that only a term like Union of Sovereign States or something similar could probably be considered. In German, it could therefore be called Union of Sovereign States, or Gemeinschaft der souveränen Staaten, or Union of Independent States, or community of independent states, depending on which term is used. For our part, we have a community of independent worlds or even a union of sovereign worlds, which we call a federation, as it is in and of itself the case on the Earth.
Then the name of the forthcoming new union should be in line with your names.
Of course, that is also what I said.
Of course, just a little complicatedly, my friend.
That may be so.
Not bad, because such things happen to all human beings.
That is also right.
Of course.
Then I can make further explanations now?
If you do not mind, I do still have some questions that would be important for us to answer, if that is not too much for you.
So ask then.
Thanks, Ptaah. Yes. First there is a question about the Vikings and Christopher Columbus. Next year, a Columbus year will be celebrated because Columbus allegedly discovered America in 1492. But as I know from you, Columbus was not the European who discovered America, but Leif the Happy, a Viking and son of the Greenland explorer, known as Eric the Red. If I remember correctly, it was you who told me on my great journey that the Vikings were the first Europeans to discover America. Actually, the ancient Chinese had been on excursions to the American continent much earlier, but that does not matter, because they hardly left behind any things that would testify to their former existence there. This should be different with the Vikings, as you said, because in several places at least ruins of former Viking buildings, etc. should still exist. To my knowledge, I have read somewhere once, there should be a scholar who said the same as you, and who should also make excavations, etc. What I no longer know exactly. Leif the Happy is said to have discovered America around the turn of the first millennium, sometime around 980 or 990. Which year was it exactly?
It was in the year 986 of your calendar, on Tuesday, the 10th of August.
Thanks. Can you still tell me where Leif the Happy had his new village built in America, and what was this called?
One of the areas that will speak of itself in the near future was called Vinland, which roughly means wine country, or land of wine, according to today's terms. One place itself was built in Newfoundland, another further south.
Of course, yes. Now I can remember your explanation again. You said that this place was probably called Vinland, but that no grapes were grown there. The name Vinland is said to have been coined when wild grapes or wild wine were found. But, as I said, it did not grow in Newfoundland, but about 550 or 600 kilometers further south in another place where it was found by the Vikings, and where they also built a hut village, but which they did not live in for very long because of the indigenous people with whom they came into conflict. As a result of these conflicts with the natives, the Vikings moved north again and settled in Newfoundland, which they called Vineland or Vinland, according to the occurrence of wild wine far south. The village itself was named after Leif the Happy, for example, Leif's Huts, or more precisely in the correct language, Leif's Buden, Leif's Buder. However, the village itself should not be described as such, but rather as a settlement, for it was truly such a settlement.
Your explanations are correct. They probably need no further explanation.
Fine, then something is clarified again. My next question refers to the criminal Saddam Hussein. Are you hiding anything from me? I mean, do you know more than you have explained?
There are several points I have not talked about. But I did not see any reason to talk about it because you did not ask me about it.
Well, then I am sure I can ask a certain question. To what extent will Saddam Hussein play a role in the future, in connection with the production of atomic bombs or the manufacture of atomic bombs? And the question also arises to what extent other countries can become powerful in the production of atomic bombs when the Soviet Union has disintegrated and the individual new states can exercise control over these dangerous weapons. This possibility must be taken into account.
Unfortunately, your assumption will become reality with regard to the concerns of the disintegrating Soviet Union and the danger of atomic bomb proliferation, because unscrupulous elements, our probability calculations show, could contribute from the sale of plans and materials to the fact that many smaller states around the world will in future profit unscrupulously from the disintegration of the Soviet Union, also with regard to the extraction of their own atomic weapons. Saddam Hussein will not be an exception in this respect either, for at the turn of 1991-1992, he will be closer to atomic bomb production than ever before. All sanctions and controls on the storage and production of nuclear and chemical weapons levied against him will be sabotaged and obstructed by Saddam Hussein. So truly effective sanctions and appropriate controls by the Nuclear Commission will be doomed to failure. The murderous dictator is in possession of many more weapons, warfare agents, and nuclear plans and materials than the entire world could wish for. By the end of this year, Saddam Hussein will be making a much bigger threat to world peace than it has been until now. Saddam Hussein is a part of the prophesied antilogos that can only be contained and stopped by the fact that he is deprived of might in an emergency action in such a form that he will never find the possibility to seize power again.
Neither you nor I demand death for any crimes, but in an absolute emergency response the right to do so is given. So Saddam Hussein should also be thrown out of life if there is no other possibility. And there probably is not, thus as I see it. In this case, your statement should also point that out, right?
If the self-defense requires it, then yes.
France, America, and the Soviet Union, etc., will soon no longer be the only nuclear powers on the Earth. That can become very dangerous for the otherwise already damaged security of the whole world, in which also the entire environmental destruction and the destruction of life, as well as the prevalence of crime and its slow, worldwide power production in politics and economics, is involved. The drug mafia in particular is making tremendous progress in this respect. For some time now, corporate criminals or similar organizations of the most diverse criminal levels have been active all over the world in such a manner that they buy into well-known hotels and hotel groups, into factories of all branches of production, into transport businesses, into medical production and weapons industry, as well as into the food industry and everything else that is possible, if they do not immediately acquire everything through a purchase and control themselves down to the last detail. Criminality is slowly moving towards seizing all economic and political power, with the responsible governments of all the countries of the world completely blind and unaware. Even in the new federation of the former Soviet Union, the time will come within a few months for the new Union states to become independent.
Assumptions which unfortunately also apply or will apply in the near future. Especially the narcotic system will be more and more spread all over the world, so also in the new federation, when the Soviet Union will be dissolved. This is also our assumption, but it will certainly come true, just as Boris Yeltsin will be discredited by the people soon after his assumption of power, and they will demand his resignation, which he will hardly follow.
Then you know a lot more about the future of events in Russia and the new states after the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
This does not quite correspond to the facts, because my statements in this regard are based only on assumptions.
Oh, well, I thought you could really tell more.
I will do that when the time comes when I have new insights to show.
Well, then I would like to know if you have got any insights regarding the cause of the AIDS epidemic. Have any new facts emerged from your research that could be helpful to Earth humans in the manner that they could gain significant insights that might also lead to finding a truly healing or even prophylactic drug?
Actually, I did not want to say anything about it yet, which is why I kept quiet about it. But now that you are directly asking about it, I cannot tell you the untruth, but have to explain that we have actually gained a lot of new insights into the disease AIDS. Only, unfortunately, I am not allowed to interfere in the development of the Earth humans, so I have to hide many things. On the other hand, I am allowed to give a small hint, which will help the earthly scientists concerned, whereby we have been giving impulses concerning these hints to those scientists for about 2 years, from whom the best efforts are to be hoped. Our impulses in this regard are aimed at recognizing the truth of the fact that the HIV virus attacks the lymphocytes in the blood and causes them to produce the hormones melanotropin and corticotropin, which then attack, switch off, and paralyze the immune system.
This is a novelty with which the scientists will certainly make a lot of progress with their research. Lymphocytes are those things that develop in lymph tissue as cells, and then migrate into the blood and are then called leukocytes or similar.
That is right.
Fine. But to my knowledge, these lymphocytes can also become otherwise dangerous, namely when they suddenly multiply abnormally, which then leads to the disease lymphocytosis. Lymphocytes are actually a very specific type of white blood cells.
Your statement is not incorrect.
Then that would also be discussed again. But one thing leaves me simply no peace, namely Boris Yeltsin in Russia, who wants to become the new dictator. You said that you suspected that the Russian people would soon recognize Yeltsin's incompetence and greed for power, which is why they would become discredited against him. As I see this man, he cannot bear his responsibility, and therefore cannot stand by it in any manner, which is why he will reject all blame if he is reproached for failures, which must inevitably come about as a result of his power-hungry actions, which do not possess any knowledge of popular or economic leadership, etc. The man Boris Yeltsin is not only absolutely incapable of economic and political leadership, but he is also power-hungry and even greedy to a horrendous degree. But these are extremely unsuitable conditions for leading a people that has been subjugated for many decades and oppressed by all the rules of evil power. And that will run into a time in which the entire economy and food supply collapses. Those are the facts I see coming, and they will be inevitable. But Yeltsin's greed for power and his greed for money will not come up against this, for even Boris Yeltsin's old proverb proves true. Greed is the driving force of all evil, and likewise the old word is fulfilled. Greed for power knows neither reason nor logic, nor understanding, nor mercy nor justice.
Your words say just everything that has developed in our assumptions. Your combinatorial explanations also correspond to those which are also ours.
One really does not need to be a clairvoyant or to look at the future in order to make sense of 1 + 1 in order to fathom the things of the time to come. The present and future events that you reveal are sufficient to make a combinatorial assessment of some of the more distant future, which you yourself cannot yet reveal, because you still lack precise predictions.
That is right.
Then my opinion will also come to it that Yeltsin will not enjoy his desire for power for so long, because the Russian people will soon come to realize his inability and recognize that he is not much good. I think it will not be long before the Russian people recognize his traitorousness.
That will certainly be so.
Well, that is what I wanted to know. Now again, a question about the AIDS epidemic and the danger of the ozone hole, if you are allowed to tell me more about it. I find that you simply give me a little sparse information and hide a few things, even if you explain quite a lot.
I always answer your questions correctly.
Well, then maybe it is because I am not specific enough with my questions. Then I want to specify them a bit. What about the AIDS epidemic in terms of its spread around the world? Is it to be expected that the epidemic will finally calm down a bit, or will it spread even worse worldwide than was assumed? With regard to the ozone holes, it would be important to know whether they will remain stationary above the South Pole and North Pole, or whether there is a danger that the holes will widen and threaten other areas of the world in the future.
The questions are clear and focused on specific things that I unfortunately have to answer negatively in both cases. The very malignant epidemic AIDS, which affects many human beings on Earth and which was originally transmitted from monkeys to humans through the fault of humans, is still advancing and will begin to spread worldwide much worse than was the case until now. Note the coming statistics of the earthly health organizations because they will report already in the following months and at the beginning of the next year of this sad reality. It will also finally be recognized that the AIDS epidemic is much more insidious than was thought carelessly. The realization will finally mature, not least due to our impulse efforts, that the epidemic does not always come to an acute outbreak after 4 to 8 years, but that it can often last much longer, sometimes even up to 20, 30, or even 50 years.
So the disease will claim more and more victims.
That will unfortunately be the case, because the spread of the disease will be faster and faster.
So there is still no hope for a quick containment. But what about the second question and its answer?
I just wanted to explain a few things about this. Your assumption is correct that the ozone layer damage will not be limited to the polar regions of the Earth, because all around the Earth the protective layer is already damaged, even if this has not yet been detected and recognized by the satellites orbiting the Earth. This will soon change, however, if the danger is recognized, even if the time of recognition is delayed until the end of the year. It has to be admitted, however, that the responsible persons on the Earth do not take the most urgently needed measures to prevent the threatening disaster, which continues to spread rapidly around the world. However, this disaster is not only threatened by the dangerous damage of the ozone belt by the guilt of the Earth humans, but also by the increased number of violent volcanic eruptions, which, however, can often be attributed directly or indirectly to the guilt of the Earth humans. Furthermore, not only is the ozone layer being dangerously destroyed, but the entire environment worldwide is being damaged and destroyed more and more, so that one must already speak of a global contamination and pollution of the environment. But also the Earth humans themselves are increasingly in danger of being destroyed and annihilated by ozone layer depletion and environmental contamination. They also know the danger of the dangerous solar radiation that causes the black cancer. But nevertheless, they still romp around outside with their bodies largely uncovered and expose their naked skin to the dangerous radiation. It is ludicrous that Earthlings still believe that they can protect themselves with sun oils and sun creams against the carcinogenic solar radiation when they rub themselves with such products. However, they are not aware that these products only have a false effect and that actual protection is not guaranteed. There is also a very great danger in such sun oils and sun creams themselves, because their substances do not simply remain as a protective layer on the skin surface, which they would have to do in a skin-protecting form, but they penetrate into the skin itself and then even into the blood. But this brings a new danger to humans, because it contaminates the protoplasm and the blood, which in turn impairs the immune system and makes the entire body extremely susceptible to suffering and diseases of all kinds, which often take a long time to heal or can no longer be cured at all. Many different allergies also appear as a result, although it often only takes a short time until the outbreak of the allergy occurs and the cause of the allergy cannot be clarified. The outbreak of allergies as well as suffering and disease is not to be dressed in one rule. However, because the outbreak time can range from a few hours or even only minutes to many years or even decades.
And what can one do against it, against the solar radiation?
The most sensible thing is not to expose yourself to the sun's rays without your clothes on. The entire body, arms, legs, and head should be protected with suitable clothing. This would also have to be the case when there will be really effective and allergy-free as well as disease-free and pain-free protective oils and creams on the market. Currently, there are experiments on Earth with such products. One of them is called Saxon and is based on microsponges. These microsponges are microscopically small, but just big enough not to penetrate the skin. These microsponges are then soaked with the necessary and allergy-free sunscreens, which are free of the generation of suffering and pathogenic germs, and which protect the skin from the dangerous solar radiation to a large extent when these are applied to the skin like a normal ointment or cream. Such microsponges can also be used for many other purposes if they are soaked with the necessary substances, for example, as an insect repellent or as a deterrent to dogs or predators. And what is probably the most important thing, such microsponges can be used as drug carriers and applied to the skin, where the corresponding active ingredients penetrate through the skin into the body and trigger the necessary reaction. This can be done both in a preventive form and as an acute factor against inflammations, infections of all kinds, diseases, and as an anti-pain agent, etc.
Fantastic. Do you also use such microsponges?
They are a component of our medicine, among many other possibilities.
What is the situation on Earth for humans with other means they use for body care? Is it different than with the protective means against the sun's rays?
Unfortunately, many products of this kind are also dangerous in the same or similar form, for example, various soaps and liquid soap products, but also lotions and other skincare products. Pure natural products are the most harmless.
I thought so. Then another question, which I've already raised but only received an evasive answer to, namely about the impending quakes in Tokyo. Despite your reluctance, I would like to have information about this.
I really do not want to give any details about that because it would cause too much agitation. I just want to tell you that a stronger quake on the 2nd of February 1992 will not be very significant. Further, I would like to explain to you only with a later prediction. By that I mean at least that this will not be today, for which I have my reasons. But if you want to have information about another threatening danger of a volcano, then I can tell you some things about it.
Of course I am interested. Above all, I am also interested in whether this danger is of natural origin or whether human beings are to blame again, by which I mean atomic bomb experiments. But I would also be interested to know what will happen with the weather in the next few weeks, simply in general terms and in a global form.
If I answer you the last question first, then unfortunately only bad and nasty things are to be mentioned. Worldwide, weather conditions are plummeting in such a kind and wise that a lot of suffering, misery, and damage is caused. There will also be many human lives to mourn, and almost no country on the earth will be spared from the evil influences of the forces of nature, which are often the fault of man himself, and which are largely due to Saddam Hussein's environmental crime, but also to the enormous environmental and air pollution caused by the volcano Pinatubo. The oil field fires in Kuwait play a particularly bad role. In many countries, huge masses of snow will fall, even in places where snow normally falls very rarely. In contrast, there will be unusual heat and drought in many places in other countries, and abnormal rainfall and massive flooding elsewhere. The blame for almost all these coming disasters, which will increase in the next decades, lies with the human beings themselves, which also refers to the greenhouse effect, as you know.
It cannot be stopped simply by banning CFCs and other ozone-depleting toxic gases and substances. As you once told me, as Quetzal already did, we can only cope with this evil in a truly effective way if the overpopulation is drastically reduced by a Complete and worldwide birth stop in such a manner that the normal level of 529 million is reached. According to your statements, the massive overpopulation is itself a huge threat to the environment. As you say, the greenhouse effect is caused by a global climate change, which is mainly caused by the fact that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is also increasing inexorably. However, CO2, as the chemical name for carbon dioxide is a gas that is not only produced chemically by humans, but primarily by humans themselves through their breathing. As a result of overpopulation, human respiration produces so much CO2 that the atmosphere can no longer cope with it. This on the one hand, because on the other hand, there is a second factor, which is just as bad, and these are the cats and dogs, which are also bred and kept out of wrong love for animals and out of wrong considerations to many billions by the terrestrial humans. Also, these dogs and cats produce carbon dioxide by their respiration in such quantities that the atmosphere cannot bear these any longer. Therefore, there is only one thing to do if the atmosphere is to be saved and the greenhouse effect eliminated. All dogs and cats kept by humans must disappear. If they do not have a right to exist as rescue animals like guide dogs and rescue dogs as well as therapause dogs, etc. And thus a worldwide birth stop must take place, which guarantees that in short time by this natural method, the terrestrial human overpopulation is drastically reduced, until the normal natural existence is reached.
No further explanation is required. Then I want to tell you about the danger I mentioned. My words refer to the volcano Ptaah in the Philippines, which starts to build up a big danger already in 2 days, which is bigger than it was at Pinatubo. There is still a factor that can prevent everything, but it is not very likely that this factor will gain strength. If not, then the huge volcano threatens to explode. If this happens, new climate-changing moments will emerge worldwide that will not be lightly considered. Like the following volcanic activities around the world. The imminent eruption of the Ptaah will be the fault of the Earth's human beings themselves, with France, in particular, being to blame for the nuclear bomb tests in the Mururoa Atoll.
But what are your predictions? Is the volcano really erupting? You speak something in a veiled form again. But before you speak of it, I would like to come back to the CO2, which destroys the ozone layer and causes a rapid climate change. You mean that everything has actually been said, but I think that this is not the case. I did not mention that carbon dioxide is also produced or released by combustion of all kinds of substances and materials, such as polystyrene, etc., as well as by combustion engines of all kinds. Normally, as far as I know, the plant world converts the carbon dioxide back into oxygen. But if too much of it is produced, then nature must inevitably fail, because then it is no longer able to provide and convert the carbon dioxide, which makes it a danger and begins to destroy life. The death of trees also depends to a large extent on this, although other factors play a decisive role in this respect. I am also thinking here of various forms of cosmic radiation and cosmic matter, which are brought to the Earth by humankind's fault through the damage to the various protective belts around the Earth, and which damage the atmosphere and the plant world just as much as they damage the lives of animals and humans. So far, only 2 belts exist around the Earth, which have vital functions of importance for the existence of all life forms on Earth, even if the scientists have not yet advanced so far in their knowledge to recognize the real importance of these belts, which are known under the name Van Allen belt. However, the earthly scientists have no idea that a total of 7 such main belts exist. Perhaps this remark is a bit snobbish of me, because I, for my part, only know about these things because you have informed me about them. But I wanted to say something else, because of the CO2 which humans, dogs and cats produce by their breathing. There are many other useless pets to mention, which humans consider only for their pleasure or as living toys, and which produce large quantities of carbon dioxide. which in too large quantities is just as dangerous for the entire plant and animal world as it is for humans. I know that know-it-alls and trivializers will denigrate this truth and claim that the CO2 produced by human beings and their useless pets is not sufficient to become dangerous for the atmosphere and for the life forms on Earth. But they still cannot change the truth by their lies and assertions of false form.
You are right. These things really had to be said, because they are of great importance. However, with regard to the protective belts around the Earth that you mentioned, Earth scientists are already working to identify another belt. This will be the third belt to be discovered, which has the function of capturing interstellar particles of cosmic rays. The discovery of this belt should be already in a few months.
Interstellar particles of cosmic radiation. This is the finest matter from the depths and breadths of the universe. If the scientists get hold of these particles, then they will finally recognize that their age assumption regarding the universe is wrong, because it has a much higher age than the Earth scientists have always claimed.
This can happen if they can actually segregate interstellar particles of the cosmic radiation and investigate what is possible in the foreseeable future if reason wins over narrow-mindedness.
Then, a question about the measures taken by the responsible scientists and the governments of the Earth to protect the ozone belt. Are these measures enough to prevent the disaster?
No, the necessary measures are not enough. They account for less than 8% of what actually needs to be done.
Do you have any studies on what measures need to be taken in the first place?
Certainly. First and foremost, the big problem is the overpopulation of the Earth by humans and their useless pets. The main focus for the fight against all evils existing on Earth must be thrown on the rigorous decimation of human beings in the form that a radical birth stop takes place in worldwide form according to the system known to you. In the same place, all useless pets must be eliminated, and at the same time all necessary protective measures and possibilities must be put into operation and implemented to ensure that the dangers to the atmosphere, the protective belts, and the fauna and flora as well as to human life are averted. As overpopulation decreases, so do the dangers to the planet, to all life, and to the protective belts and to the atmosphere. Through the dramatic decrease in overpopulation, vastly less amounts of toxins are produced, and in equal measure the environment is less poisoned. The traffic with all polluting explosive motor vehicles is contained just as rapidly as the consumption of electrical energy generated by polluting and life-threatening nuclear power plants, as well as by fossil fuel power plants, etc. No more toxic and non-disposable waste products are produced, and the mountains of rubbish of all kinds collapse. Only the enormous reduction of car traffic of private, scientific, military, and commercial form would bring a tremendous success concerning the recovery of all earthly life and the atmosphere as well as the protection belts encompassing the Earth, all of which are endangered by the criminal destructiveness of the Earth humans, whereby also the atom bomb tests have a considerable part in it, even if these take place underground, whereby, however, also the Earth itself is endangered by earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, etc. However, you know all these things and know what measures are necessary to bring about a turn for the better or even for the good.
But this knowledge is of no use to me, because I am not a governor, but only a simple citizen. The rulers work according to their own system, and maneuver the world and the people into roaring misery. If I think only once of the financial economy that is run here in Switzerland by the Federal Council, through which the state becomes more and more indebted, then the howling misery could befall you. Switzerland's entire state financial economy shows that those responsible in this sector have no ability whatsoever to manage this important part of the state properly. If I were at the helm, I would pull Switzerland out of debt within a short space of time through rigorous measures, which would also reduce the citizens' taxes. But I am not at the helm, and so the financial industry continues to sabotage the path of debt.
Your method, which works with absolute certainty, is known to us, and we have once made calculations in this respect which confirm your words. If you would handle the financial economy of the Swiss state, your home country would soon be an absolutely debt-free country, an unprecedented model for all states on the earth. We know that with absolute certainty.
For once I agree with you, without feeling praised. The only difficulty with such a financial administration job would be that I would have to have an absolutely free hand and be able to manage everything as I am used to, without anyone tampering with me. But the fact is that our finance state twerps do not know anything about finance, because otherwise they would not constantly conjure up new mountains of debt and invent new harassment taxes to fill the holes of their inability, instead of being properly budgeted and freeing the citizens from a part of the oppressive taxes.
I feel that you are saddened by this state unevenness.
You can say that out loud, and unevenness is good. To put it mildly, it is a damned mess and exploitation of citizens, which is carried out by the responsible financial geniuses.
Your words are true, because the responsible human beings are really incompetent, at least as far as the matter of finance is concerned. This is also explained by our scientists who deal with the terrestrial governmental financial economic problems. Unfortunately, your home country is no exception. But let me now speak of something else, because the time is already very advanced. Unfortunately, it is no longer enough to explain to you all those things that you would like to know about the future, which is why I have to postpone many of these concerns to a later time in order to be able to explain them to you after all. I also wanted to explain a few things about the vice of smoking, at least in a nutshell, because I think some words should be said about it. But first I would like to anticipate certain events that will happen in the near future. However, I am already talking about the time of the coming year 1992, in the course of which some important events will take place. Thus, it results that draft laws are worked out, which lead to the final abolition of the death penalty in Switzerland, which is at present still legally anchored for the military inhuman penal regulation and application of punishment. Further legal changes will also change the situation with regard to the inadequate handling of riots by racial haters, xenophobes and asylum seekers, etc., because work is being done to make such machinations and riots punishable by law. Unfortunately, however, the law is handled incorrectly, so that it will be considered more as a muzzle for those who tell the truth than that racial hatred and xenophobia are actually fought.
What is already long overdue is a really good law in this respect, especially in the so-called constitutional state of Switzerland, in which some laws are more of a rubber stamp than real law. If one reads daily in the newspapers how criminals, druggies, delinquents, street killers, and other rabble are handled with kid gloves and sentenced only to fines or conditional punishments, then one's hat can go off to anger at this injustice. Drunken street killers and all kinds of murderers soon have to reckon only with small fines as punishment, and
that is unfortunately the truth. The blame for this lies with the humanitarians all around who, as a result of their own effeminacy and life incapability, bring a deadly false humanity into being and spread it worldwide, whereby in the mass of overpopulation, any kind of crime can flourish more and more without restraint. However, there is never any mention of the fact that, in reality, purposeful places of measure fulfillment, places where wrongdoers can reflect and rectify their thoughts and actions through societally imposed harsh measures, would have to be created, and the wrongdoers would have to be deported there, because this sole helpful solution is regarded as inhumane by all those who are humanely effeminate and incapable of living, regardless of which social class they belong to or which official positions they hold. They are too effeminate and too incapable of life to allow the only truthful solution to take humane form and be carried out. This is also the reason why all kinds of governing criminal creatures can come to power in the most diverse countries, such as Saddam Hussein and many others around the world. Instead of such elements being sent into a lifetime exile to a suitable place of the fulfilling of measures, the people still cheer them on and encourage them. Often such criminals then hold a tremendous position of power for many decades, which assures them of an absolute dictatorship. There are even many worldwide recognized politicians, who in truth are nothing more than governing criminals and mass murderers, but who are nevertheless revered by the world population or by large parts of it, as is the case, for example, in Israel with Shamir, who, as a terrorist, brought just as much deadly suffering to many people as Begin, who also murdered many hundreds of people with his own hands and was praised for it, as were all other mass murderers of the same or similar ilk. This kind of criminal usually remains in leading positions for a long time because of the lowly intelligence of the people's will, in which they are protected by bodyguards and often reach old age. Ultimately, however, these murderous criminals must also go the way of the transitory, and thus leave life, even if they, unfortunately, escape the well-deserved penalty in life. Nevertheless, they must pay off their guilt, and this repayment will not be as easy as killing human lives. This will also be the case, for example, with the murderer Begin, whose death will take place on the 9th of March 1992, and whose preliminary process of dying will contain so many horrors that his departure will consist only of pain, fear, and misery, after which he will fall into madness at the age of 79 and will then no longer be conscious of himself and will die in a consciousness-based state of derangement, as our vision of his future has shown.
Which of course has nothing to do with punishment, because that would be beyond all creational laws and recommendations.
Certainly that is correct. But you know the relevant laws better than I do.
If you want, I will explain.
It might be important.
Good. I know from you that Begin was the offspring product of adultery, and that he was also a person who had not cared for laws and commands since his earliest youth. Nor Shamir, Sharon, Ceausescu, Saddam Hussein, and many other governing criminals and mass murderers. Begin was an inciter of war and a killer who, as I know, once killed 242 Palestinians in a single day. At least that is what the Quetzal told me.
Which also corresponds to the actual events.
That is what I also assumed. But I actually wanted to talk about something else. Namely the fact why Begin will go through all the horrors of all hells during his pre-death process, and then finally succumb to madness. The reason for this is to be found in the fact that during his life, this mass murderer absorbs all the horrors and pains of a physical and psychological nature, and stores them in the memory banks, and thus everything that he has consciously or unconsciously inflicted on his victims. This storage takes place in unconscious form, and is deposited impulsively in the planetary memory banks. The unconscious storage of these impulses is so strong that a determination of the wrongdoer arises from it, which has a direct effect on him. This means that this criminal and mass murderer makes the psychological and physical horrors of his victims, which he unconsciously absorbs, his own destiny for his death, although this does not extend to the next life of a new personality. This is the form of self-punishment of such fallible ones, if they cannot fully remove that part of the guilt in the fallible life, which leads to the normal process of removal of guilt in the following death life of the total consciousness block through processing, but which does not result in the form of assistance to the former victims in their next lives and new personalities. A process which can be fulfilled in Codex members up to 7,000 reincarnations if everything takes its normal course. but which falls away through the dissolution of the codex, and is really only made possible by a codex provision. Even mass murderers of the normal and non-code-bound kind are not able to go the normal course of dying, for through their criminal and life-destroying deeds, or through their other capital crimes, they force themselves to a self-punishment of the kind mentioned. According to the law of creation, this self-punishment is given as a logical possibility, but it can only come into function through the illogical thinking of the human being. Illogical thinking is based on the fact that one wrongly assumes that they can, aus arten, get very badly out of control of the good human nature, with impunity without being called to account. In his illogical thinking, however, one does not recognize that he or she has a conscience that refers him or her, via the subconscious, to a punishing destiny that affects the dying process. Even if one thinks of a person as having no conscience or only a wicked conscience, then this is not correct. For the conscience does not only work in the form that its work becomes obvious in the life in question, but it also works in the aforementioned form that it sends impulses via the subconscious into the memory banks, and thus creates a destiny for the state before the actual dying process. These kinds of determinations are always and in every case fulfilled and inevitable in all their horrors, fears, and pains. In fact, however, they are a product of the fallible human being himself or herself who, through their conscience, creates such determinations which they disregard and do not want. This, however, is the compensating justice through the laws of the creation, which themselves know no punishment and no punitive measures, but only ways by which the human being punishes himself or herself when they misbehave. However, all this has in no wise anything to do with the misunderstood karma through which human beings allegedly then have to atone for their deeds in the previous life as a new personality in the next life. This assertion is absolutely false and irrelevant, for no creational law knows such a form of karmic punishment or similar nonsense. The self-punishment mentioned is based on completely different things, which I have already explained.
It is important that you have talked about it. There was also a certain ignorance of these things on my part. Thank you for your detailed teaching. These concerns are much deeper than I and we are generally aware of. The connections are therefore more profound than I suspected. I expected another explanation, one that could have referred more to a conscious destiny. The deeper connections and law-based concerns were unknown to me.
I suspected that. But I am glad that I could make things understandable to you. It is only to be feared that many new questions will arise from the group members, which I am not yet allowed to answer. So far, I have not talked about these things, and have not made any statements to the group members. I wanted to prevent misunderstandings from appearing, because the idea that this kind of provision might have something to do with the misinterpretation of karma can easily arise. It is sometimes very difficult to explain something when the understanding has not yet matured. Sometimes, explaining the right thing at the wrong time is almost impossible. Out of this, it can happen that a mistake is made at the time. This can lead to misunderstandings or unjustified attacks. It is then simply expected infallibility from one. But also, I just make mistakes, like every other person also, only I must mostly keep silent about it and reprimand myself, so that others do not see it and do not notice it. One is simply not infallible as a human being. But as the saying goes so nicely, even wise men make mistakes, but they keep silent about them, which does not mean that I consider myself wise, but only so clever that I can sometimes keep my mouth shut at the right moment.
You make your light quite small, my dear friend. That does not exactly correspond to the facts. But now I see that today I probably will not be able to tell you all those future things that I actually wanted to explain to you.
That is not so bad. On the contrary, we have had a conversation so far that is of great value. Everything that has been said, I think, surpasses all predictions of future value. Nevertheless, I am still wondering about one thing. If the old Soviet Union is finally destroyed, what will become of the Pravda Party periodical? Will this newspaper then become the official publication paper of the new association, the new federation?
No. This will not be the case, because the party newspaper, founded by Vladimir Lenin some 80 years ago, will no longer be published from the 13th of March 1992 due to lack of money and various other reasons. At this point, however, it is not yet clear whether the suspension will be final or whether it will be possible to start publishing at a later date. The suspension of the newspaper edition coincides with another event that will take place at the same time in Erzincan in Turkey, where especially the provincial capitals Erzincan, Erzurum, and Bingöl will be largely destroyed by a severe earthquake and many human beings will die. According to our investigations, the magnitude of the earthquake is likely to range from 6.9 to 7.1 on the Richter scale. Furthermore, at the same time, it will also emerge that various states of the earth intend to commit a new crime against the life of the animal kingdom, namely by repealing protective measures for various animal species after years before such protective measures could finally be enforced and realized with much effort and misery. As a result, the previously protected animals again fall into the area of extermination by criminal humans, as is the case with many other animal species, which are in ever greater need of protection and whose list of extermination risk is growing ever larger. This applies to many species of terrestrial and aquatic animals, but also to birds and many plant species. But just as animals and plants are dealt with, so also humans deal with each other. Saddam Hussein, for example, one of the worst, has been kidnapping human beings for many years to cruelly torture them before he has them executed. He will continue to do so until 2004, when he is forcibly stopped. He is an unprecedented violent criminal, and he will not in any real wise adhere to the UN sanctions, nor will he destroy his weapons. On the contrary, he will again try to arm himself with all means and also fight the Kurds to the death. But all this will come to an end.
Nothing else is to be expected from this guy. But please say, do you know the number of deaths that the earthquake in Turkey will claim? I know the cities you mentioned in the province of Erzincan very well, and I have many acquaintances there. I lived in that area for several months. The Tagsanzeiger Zurich are among them human beings who mean a great deal to me. You know that many of them are like brothers or sisters or like parents for me, when one looks at our relationships of acquaintance.
I know that very well. But it is the same with many other human beings in different countries where you have been. Through the confusion of war and especially earthquakes, you have lost many of these loved ones during the past years, as we, unfortunately, had to inform you in several cases. It will be the same again next year when the severe earthquake demands its tributes. You have also lost dear acquaintances through the crimes of Saddam Hussein, both through the human abductions and executions he staged and through the Gulf War. You know a lot of human beings in the Near and Middle East, and even a lot who are close to your heart, so to speak, if I may use this earth-human term. Your suffering is often very great. I know, and I often ask myself how you can bear it, especially if you know what will happen and who will be affected by the evil events through a vision of the future or the like.
Once again, I do not know, my friend. I do not know myself. Somehow everything passes. It just always hurts damn well. The fact that I usually have not seen the human beings I have grown fond of for 20 or 25 years does not change that. Natural death is also easier to cope with than a violent death caused by human guilt, no matter whether the violent death is caused directly or indirectly by human guilt. The memories remain and do not fade in me in relation to all these human beings. Because for me, they meant and mean a great importance for their own existence and for the fulfillment of the creational laws and recommendations in evolutionary form. This, apart from the fact that these human beings are really dear to my heart, as you said. Many of my adventures and experiences and many events and occurrences are related to them. Each one of these human beings has her own story, which is often linked to my own story.
I also know that very well, my friend. There are often strange connections that bind these human beings and you to each other, and they all look up to you with respect, which unfortunately is not always the case in your present environment because of hatred, envy, megalomania, and slander, etc. against you and your person, because you unswervingly and in spite of all challenges and intrigues fulfill your mission and represent the truth.
It is, as you say. But the truth is that it is only the envious, unreasonable, fanatical, misguided, sectarian, delusional, and others who are involved in these areas.
Certainly it is so. Well, however, my dear friend Edward, I must end our conversation. My tasks urge me to go. So farewell until the next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Ptaah. Send my best and dearest greetings to all.
I would like to do that. Goodbye, Salome.
Hey, nice, Salome, and he is gone.